Alright guys, in this video we're going to do a couple things. First of all, I want to just run our server, okay? So Django actually comes with a dev server that we can run, and that's what we'll use to develop locally. And then we're going to take a look at the files, okay? And when we run our server, it'll actually create a file or two as well. So let's go ahead and run it. So to do this, we use our manage.py file. Remember when we did the help, you saw the run server command? That's what we want to run. So let's say python manage.py, and we want to do run server. Alright, so when you run this, you're probably going to see this. You have 15 unapplied migrations. Don't worry about this. This is normal. I know that they make it look like it's some big error, but it's not. It just means you have migrations that you haven't ran yet, and that just has to do with like some of the default apps that come with Django, like the auth and the admin area, stuff that will be applied to the database that hasn't been yet. So don't worry about that message. But you can see down here that it says starting developer server at 127.0.0.1 port 8000, and we can quit this server with Control-C. All right, so let's head on over to our browser, and let's go to, we can use that loopback address or localhost. So if we say localhost port 8000, and there we go. So now we have Django up and running. All right, now I'm not gonna, this is just the landing page here. It's nothing special. It's a lot better looking than the Django 1 landing page, but there's really nothing here other than links to documentation and stuff like that. All right, so we'll obviously replace this with our application, but let's go back to VS Code, and notice down here we have a bunch of stuff. This is just the logs from our server, so every time we visit a page, it's going to show the request and all that. So when we run our server, we're going to want to open up another, let me just close that up. We're going to want to open up another tab here for our terminal to run commands, and we can switch back and forth. So if we want to go back to the server, we can do that. All right, actually, what's on this first one here? Well, I guess, yeah, we'll use the first one. I'll get rid of the one I just created. All right, so our server's running. Actually, I'll just leave that one open. But I want to now take a look at some of these files. So notice that this DB SQLite 3 file was created when we ran our server. This actually wasn't here before. Same thing with some of the PyCache files here. Now this DB SQLite 3 file, this is where your data will be stored if you use the SQLite database, which we're not going to be, because it's not a database you would use for like a real production application. It's nice for prototyping and testing, and maybe if you have a really small website that has very little data, very little traffic, but it's not really suitable for real production apps. But this is where your data would be stored if you were to use SQLite. And even if there were data here, we couldn't read it within a file like in VS Code. We'd need some kind of client to view the data. All right, so we don't really have to worry about that. And that's actually in our git ignore, so that wouldn't be pushed to our repository, whether you're using it or not. We could actually delete it if we wanted to. And then this PyCache folder, you're not going to have to worry about this either. These will be generated when you run your server, and you'll never have to touch them at all. All it does is make your program start a little faster. When your scripts change, they'll be recompiled, and even if you delete these files or you delete this whole folder, it'll just reappear once you run your server again. Okay, so no worries about that. We're not really going to have to worry about this init.py file either. This is always empty to begin with, and we usually never touch it. In fact, I don't even think we need it after version 3.3, because the purpose of it is to basically make sure that we can use files as packages, and it prevents some of the directories with common names, like let's say string or something like that, from unintentionally hiding valid modules. So it just keeps everything in order so that we can use packages. But we don't have to worry about that. We're not going to touch it. So the settings file is probably the most important one here. I'm just going to make this smaller here. So this has just a bunch of like key value pairs. It imports the OS module, which has to do with the operating system, or package I should say, not module. And this base dir is our project's base directory, and where they're getting it by using a bunch of different methods attached to this OS package, so like OS path, dir name, and so on. It just ends up getting us the base directory. All right, then down here, the security key is for production. Okay, so if you deploy a Django website, you never want this to be shared. Okay, you want to keep this secret, and later on when we get to deployment, I'm going to show you how we can actually hide it so that we don't have to like include this in our GitHub repository or anything like that. Let's see, so debug, so we have the option to set this debug to true or false, which in development we want it set to true, but in production we want it set to false. Okay, this gives us very helpful error messages and warnings when things go wrong. It displays info about our code right in the browser, so in production, even if something goes wrong, you don't want that information displayed in the browser, because that anybody that's using your website can see it and they can figure things out, and it's a security risk. So make sure that before you deploy, you change this to false and keep it on true when you're developing. So allowed hosts is basically just an empty array at first, but when we deploy and we change debug to false, you want to put a list of host domains that this website can serve. So for instance, the DigitalOcean IP address or any domain names, anything like that should go in this allowed host list. All right, down here we have installed apps. So Django has a concept of apps, and you can have multiple apps per project. Like our listings app we'll create a realtors app, but these here are actually default apps that come with Django by default. So we have like the admin, which controls the admin area, the auth, sessions, messages. All this stuff is included with core Django. Then we have some middleware. So this is just a list of middleware that Django uses, like the CSRF. This is for cross-site forgery. A lot of this is security based. But yeah, any middleware that is being used will be put in that list. In this root URL conf, this is just a string that represents the full import path to the root URL conf, where your initial URL file is. This will usually be the name of your project, which ours is BTRE, and then .urls. Okay, templates are what are used to generate HTML for our application to just display to the user in the browser, and this tells Django where to look for templates, what options to use, and so on. Down here, WSGI application. This is the path of the WSGI application object that Django's built-in servers use. So when we create our project, you can see a file here called wsgi.py, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So databases, this is where you want to set up your database parameters. As you can see, the default engine is SQLite 3. We're going to be changing this to Postgres. Well, this is also where you put like your password and your username and stuff like that. Let's see, auth passwords, validators. So this is basically a setting where we just set types of rules for our passwords. I'm not really going to get into that. And then we have some stuff to do with like language and time. And then this static right here, this is actually the path that we want to use for static files like CSS, some JavaScript, images, things like that. And you can change this to something else if you want, but we're just going to keep it at static. So that's the gist of the settings file. So now let's take a look at urls.py. So this is kind of like our routing file. We have this URL patterns list, and we put in paths. So you can see there's one here for the admin area, and the path, usually you should have a forward slash at the end, and then it can be linked to a view method. Okay, so we have something called views, and you'll see that when we start to create our apps. And you can link to a view method, or you can link to the URLs from another file. Like in this case, we're linking to the admin URLs. All right, and then every app that we create, like let's say when we create our listings app, it'll create a new folder called listings, and we'll want to create a new urls.py in that listings app. and then in this main urls.py we'll bring that in just like they did with the admin. And then any specific route that we want, like let's say listing/add, we would put that in the listings url.py file. Okay, so this is like the collection of all of your app's URLs links, which look like this. Okay, and you'll learn more about this later. This is, if you're confused, don't worry about it. I'll show you exactly what I mean later. So this WSGI file, this is a little difficult to understand. You don't have to completely understand it, but basically it stands for Web Server Gateway Interface. It's a specification that describes how a web server communicates with web applications and how web applications can be chained together to process one request. And it just has a lot to do with hosting your site so that other people can actually access it. And we'll be talking more about that stuff later, and when we get into the deployment and stuff like that. Alright guys, so we now have Django set up. We have a server running. So in the next section, we're going to create our first app, which is going to be our Pages app. Okay, I want to create a separate app for any static like pages, because we do want to have like an about page. So I want anything like that. The about page, the home page should be part of the Pages app. So we'll get to that next.